nervous because I'm here now.
Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I'm Glenn Martin, here with my co-host James Haskell. And in this episode, we welcome a familiar face and a favorite guest of ours, Matt Stevens, the managing editor for the Ravens Wire at USA Today. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Hey, guys, thanks for having me. It's always nice to be on.
Appreciate that, man. So, just want to let everyone know, we always like to have Matt on, but Matt did write an article that was titled "The Ravens Aren't a Great Team, no matter what their record says." So that instantly, like as soon as we saw that, Glenn was like, "We got to have Matt on because we want to talk about it." Because I think that there's a lot of, when you get what you did to me in that article is you got into the details of it. We have his 5-1 record. It might be a little bit of a facade. So let's dig deeper. And I'm going to be honest. It's hard sometimes to look yourself in the mirror and to be honest with oneself. It's hard. Yeah. And it's just as hard when it's your favorite football team. Okay. So I want to talk about that and make some references here. But my first question is this. If I told you before the season started that the Ravens would have a 5-1 record through 6 weeks, you probably wouldn't have been surprised. But what has surprised you about the Ravens and how they got to this 5-1 record?
Well, I think what has kind of surprised me is their level of grit. And that's something that I was concerned about heading into the season. So we'll start off on a positive note on that, which is, this is a team that when tested in previous years tended to fold. They still showed a little bit of that against Kansas City, but you kind of give that a certain amount of like a pass because, well, it's the reigning Super Bowl champs. They've struggled against them. They don't really match up well. All right, fine. That'll happen. But against Houston and now against Philadelphia, they showed a little something. They showed an ability to, despite giving up a good number of points, despite having some struggles, despite not doing everything well, still doing what's necessary in order to pick up the win, which is, I think, crucial for them. And if they want to win in the playoffs, that's the mentality they're going to need to continue forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one guy that could be key going into that playoff stretch is going to be Marquise Brown. And he came into this season with a ton of expectations. I mean, there was a lot of social media hype surrounding his muscle gain and the recovery of his foot. And some fans are a little unhappy with what they're seeing in a sense that they're still seeing the avoidance of all contact. They're still seeing him going down and not really showing that make you miss ability that we were all hoping for when he came out of Oklahoma. So what are your, while saying that, he is still leading our team in targets, receptions, yards. So it's not all bad, but what has your evaluation been through the first 6 games of Hollywood season?
I think it's been pretty solid. I mean, I'll say this, the Ravens in a few instances have kind of talked about how Marquise' foot is still not like maybe 100%, which is a little concerning because they did speak up about how he was getting there all off season long. The thought process would be that he's 100% now. So considering the fact that his health is absolutely the biggest worry we have about Marquise Brown upon the Ravens drafting him, if he's not 100%, that's concerning in year 2. But I like what they've shown so far out of him. I like the fact that they've thrown him in a lot of different situations all over the field. They've used him short. They've used him in intermediate routes as well as deep. And while the deep ball isn't necessarily working quite the same way that it did last year or at all really this year, the fact that, again, he 26 receptions, 376 yards and a touchdown speaks volumes to his ability to get open underneath and make things happen with the football. I'd like to see him do more of that. And you mentioned he's avoided some contact in some situations. He maybe hasn't been super elusive in the way that a lot of people were expecting. And a lot of that maybe has to do with the fact that defenses are really taking him away. Baltimore doesn't have a ton of weapons, so they're able to go ahead and focus in on him. But I like what I've seen out of him so far, and I want to see him kind of take it up to the next level here in the second half of the season. Maybe if Baltimore makes a trade for somebody or if someone else steps up, hopefully we'll see him get, a better coverage from that standpoint and be able to kind of show off a little bit of what he's truly capable of doing.
Yeah, I tell you what, hopefully no representatives from Adidas are watching this because I say he needs to get out of them dang Adidas's, man. Everyone I see in Adidas has constant injuries and constant, foot and knee and this, that, and the other. He needs to switch to something else, man. Adidas ruined Derrick Rose's career. I'm done with Adidas, all right?
Wow. I'm not watching.
This show is sponsored by Reebok.
That was awesome. Now, I do have a question about the offensive line. So are you surprised at all? Because this is something that Glenn and I talked about, in the preseason at length. Are you surprised that Tyree Phillips battling multiple injuries at right guard? Even with that being so, the Ravens have chosen to play Patrick McCarr and even Ben Powers some, but no DJ Fluker at right guard. Like, understandably, he seems to be the swing tackle, and he's kind of taken over that position. But I figured he'd be a better option than McCarry and Powers at right guard, based on the fact that he is an abnormally large human being that has experience at that role.
Yeah, I think I'm on record in a few different spots saying that I thought he was going to start the season at right guard.
Yeah.
So here we are. Yeah, I mean, I'm a little shocked by it, but the more that I think about it, and the Ravens' unwillingness to put him in that position, maybe points to how little depth they have at tackle. Ronnie Stanley was a little banged up. Orlando Brown's been a little bit banged up. Ronnie Stanley typically misses 1, 2, 3 games a season. I think he's missed one at this point this season. So he's due for at least one more. You don't want to put Fluker out there at right guard, potentially have him get banged up, and then Stanley goes down. Who are you putting out there? You're putting Will Holden out there? The answer is you better hope not. Will Holden probably listens to the show and is going to hate me after this. But, I think that's their concern. So they'd much rather have less impressive play at right guard than potentially screw themselves later on at tackle, which could ultimately injure a running back, ultimately injure Lamar Jackson. Those things are going to be a little bit more imperative versus, Jackson can get away from an interior pass rusher a lot better than he is going to be able to get from an outside linebacker.
Yeah, well, maybe the best player this season so far, it might be Marlon Humphrey, and he's being asked to do a lot of different things this season. He's an outside corner. He's been the slot corner. He's manned up on tight ends. He's been blitzing. He's been doing a ton. And then, of course, the punching out of footballs has made him quite famous and quite popular. Do you think that he deserves to be in the conversation or in the running for Defensive Player of the Year?
Absolutely. I mean, he leads right now. He leads the league in forced fumbles. So that should come as no shock. He has 2.5 sacks. He has more sacks than the guy you paid nearly $17 million to sack the quarterback in Matthew Judon. He's like second on the team in sacks, actually, which is kind of depressing. But, he's played outstanding football. He doesn't necessarily get as many interceptions as you'd like to see. And I think a lot of the times when you start talking about those postseason awards, there's end of season awards, especially with like guys like cornerbacks and safeties, it's all about the interception total. And he's never been a guy to kind of lead in that regard. But when you take in all that he does, and as you mentioned, all over the field, he'll play literally everywhere against anyone, bigger, smaller, faster, short, it doesn't matter. And he does really, really well with it. He has some lapses here and there, which is going to happen. He's not, a true quote unquote lockdown corner like we used to see in the 90s, but at this point, those guys don't necessarily exist in the same way that they did back in those days. So the fact that he's punching footballs out, the fact that he's all over the field, the fact that he is kind of the heart of this defense in a very large way, I think speaks volumes to, what he means to Baltimore and ultimately what he should mean to the rest of the league.
Yeah, I love watching him get after the runners when they, when he's trying to punch that ball out, they really get in a defensive position, quasi-fetal position when he gets a little close.
Yeah.
I like that. Now, another guy I want to talk about on the defensive side is Patrick Queen. He's really impressed. He's already won AFC Defensive Player of the Week awards, for his performance, of course, against the Bengals a couple weeks ago. But do you think he should be in the running for Defensive Rookie of the Year?
Absolutely. Again, this is a guy that leads the team in combined tackles. And for Baltimore, that means quite a lot. I mean, that was Ray Lewis's territory. It was CJ Mosley, his territory. He's doing exceptionally there. Despite, again, being on a defense that is just chock full of stars. We mentioned Marlon Humphrey. We've got Marcus Peters. We've got Calais Campbell. You've got Judon. You've got Brandon Williams. You've got Derek. I mean, we can go down that list of all the defensive players, but this is a lot of talent. And the fact that he leads the team in that regard. Also, 2 sacks. He is third on the team in sacks. Start talking about quarterback hits. He has 5 of those, which is, a fairly high up there. The guy has the most fumble return yards this far this season. All those things are exactly what you want to see on a resume when it comes to defensive rookie of the year. Now, again, there's probably going to be a guy that's going to win it outside because, they play more often. They're on a worse team. They get more playing time. They get more special roles and are able to kind of rack up those sacks in a different way. But he certainly should be in the conversation. And if you're Baltimore, you've got to be thrilled about what you've gotten out of him so far.
Yeah, his athleticism. I remember watching one of the first games with my father, and he kept thinking it was a safety or a DB flying into it because his speed is it's unreal. So I can't wait to see how he's going to continue to get better throughout the season. But another guy who's coming off of an AFC Defensive Player of the Week is, of course, Calais Campbell for his performance against the Eagles. He seems to be – it was kind of interesting last game. Me and Jimmy kind of talked about it. I wanted to get your take on this, Matt. Do you find it purely coincidental that he had his best game when Brandon Williams was out and Derek Wolfe were out? Maybe they moved him around the line, used him in some different roles, or do you think it was just purely coincidence and that we expect him to do the same stuff going forward when those guys are back?
I'd love to be able to give you a solid, A or B answer there. I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's the fact that he was moved around a little bit more often, and also keep in mind he's going up against the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line, which was missing 3 starters going into the game. And then 2 more guys dropped out in the middle of the game too. So, he's going up against really 4th stringers. If Campbell didn't do well, we should all be concerned about that. So again, it's a little bit of combination of those 2 answers in terms of his week 6 performance. And as you see it on film, he's tossing guys around. I don't think that happens against Pro Bowl offensive linemen. It does happen against guys who are getting signed off the street. Yeah,
it's interesting you say that because I noticed today that he literally got a guy cut. The right guard, I think, for the Eagles he's no longer on the team.
Yeah. He tossed him out of the roster.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? He's putting guys out of work based on his, his pass rush ability, not to injury, due to lack of performance. But another guy, speaking of lack of performance, I want to talk to you about Miles Boykin. Boykin, and I want to do this I want to ask this question, but I kind of want to refer back to what you mentioned about the Ravens' reluctancy to make changes, right? They'll show up every week and kind of do the same things. So Boykin is getting criticism from fans and some coaches after him and Lamar continue to struggle, forming that connection. Is it time for Boykin to take a backseat in this offense and give guys like Duvernay and Prochet some of his snaps?
Yes and no. I think Boykin has what it takes. You look at Chase Claypool over in Pittsburgh, granted 2 very different offenses, 2 very different quarterbacks, but they're effectively the same player. They ran the same 40. They have the same combine measurements, the same height and weight.
Yeah.
Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin are the same guy, which might explain why Boykin hasn't shown up because he's doing his other job as Chase Claypool. But that was a terrible joke. I think he has what it takes. I've seen him get open and Lamar Jackson just ignore him. And that could be maybe from last year and from the off season and just not getting that chemistry together and you don't trust the guy, and drops have been a problem for Baltimore over the last handful of years. I wouldn't necessarily blame Lamar Jackson for looking at Boykin and go, hey, I'm going to throw it somewhere else at sometimes. But at the same time, the guy's open. He is getting the job done on that level. And while I know the Ravens staff, David Culley, kind of called Boykin out and saying that, he wasn't on the same page, that there's miscommunication issues. I take a lot of that with a grain of salt, mainly because, your wide receivers coach isn't going to call out your franchise quarterback. He's going to call out the 3rd wide receiver on the team. That makes the most sense and put the blame there if people are going to question you on it. So you take some of the stuff at face value, you take some of it with a little bit of grain of salt. So yeah, I think Miles Boykin can get it done, but I do want to see Duvernay get on the field a little bit more. We were talking before we started here, 36% of the snaps, offensive snaps last week. That's the most he's played so far this season. That's not enough. I mean, he caught 3 of 3 passes for 31 yards. Get the guy on the field more often. The week before, he had a 42-yard end around. He should be playing more. Clearly, he's got what it takes. Clearly, he's doing the right things. Clearly, he's stacking big plays on top of big plays. I don't know why there's this unwillingness from the coaching staff to slowly bring those guys along when you're not getting the play out of, I mean, Willie Snead for that matter either.
Yeah.
Those guys need to maybe start being tested a little bit more, having their snap count decreased, and you go with a hot hand. And if Duvernay isn't it eventually, and Boykin starts showing up in practice and starts showing up in games, then cool, you go with the hot guy there. But you have to start figuring it out. You can't just go ahead and put a guy on the field and go, it'll figure itself out, because clearly it hasn't. It hasn't over 25 years of this team being in existence. So I don't know why it would start now.
Man, well, I tell you, I do see the similarities between Claypool and Boykin. Certainly their measurables are the same, but man, to me, one plays to his size and the other one plays way smaller than his size. And I think you can figure out which is which. It is early on, but man, I want to see some more of that natural go up and get the ball ability that I've seen out of Claypool. And we just haven't seen it from Boykin yet, but he still has some room to grow, and hopefully he does so. But I know a lot of NFL coaches always have that saying, or coaches in general for any sport always have that saying of, it's good to have too many it's a good problem to have too many players at one position. They always say that. Mm-hmm. But to me, I don't know if that's the case here in Baltimore in the running back room, because if Ingram is healthy going forward throughout the bye, do you prefer that they continue to kind of bounce the load around from one guy to the next, week to week? Do you think they should continue to split the carries the way they have between the three, or do you think the coaches should consider naming one the lead back and use them accordingly?
I don't necessarily mind kind of having the 1-2 punch. I think you've got the talent, if you're Baltimore, to do that. You've got two different skill sets. You've got Dobbins, who is a little bit faster, is able to hit the ends. He's a better receiver than Gus Edwards is. But then you've got your power guys in Ingram and Edwards, who are far better interior than they are outside. I think you have the ability to do that. And we saw that last season with Gus Edwards and Mark Ingram kind of in that dual role as well. I think when you look at the stats, both Ingram and Gus Edwards, 4.5 yards per carry, which isn't terrible in its own right, but you start looking at those things and you go, okay, well, Edwards really, Ingram's has been on like 2 or 3 big plays, has been the bulk of his yardage. He's not getting it done a lot of the times on early downs. Gus Edwards had a little bit more success, but also not exactly getting it done. And you look at J.K. Dobbins, 6.2 yards per carry, and you go, why aren't you feeding him the football? He has half the carries of Ingram, Edwards, and Jackson. He has 25 carries compared to 50, 50, and 48. And he's averaging a little more than a yard and a half over what those guys are. He has a 44-yard run. He has some good receptions as well, 11 out of 14 targets. Why is he not on the field more often? Why is he not getting more meaningful snaps? And again, just like we've discussed with this offense and the not moving Duvernay in for a guy like Boykin or Willie Snead, you look at this offense and you go, why are you guys beating yourself here? Why are you not doing the smart thing, which is get your rookie involved? He hasn't fumbled the ball. He hasn't fumbled the ball. Lamar Jackson has 3 fumbles so far, so clearly you're not necessarily afraid of a guy putting the ball on the turf. I just stop beating yourself, do the smart thing, stop trying to be cute, and hand the ball to Dobbins a majority of the time and use Edwards and Ingram as they're healthy as kind of your power back to go ahead and maybe slow things down if you want to milk the clock, or to kind of batter a defense if you want to go ahead and go the long game over the course of a game.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, because one of the things that I heard a commentator mention is that one of the things they don't like is that when Mark gets up or Gus gets up or even JK, they make a nice play, the first thing that they do is they stare over at the sideline to see if they're coming out. And that's just not a good spot to be in, based on, especially with Mark and Gus, because they're rhythm backs, that they're high volume. The higher volume their carries get, the more impact they seem to have. So it is an interesting balance we're going to have to keep drawing, I think. But I think that's a great point with JK. I think they're a little reluctant to put him, running in between the tackles, while he's not necessarily as good maybe as Gus and as Mark. Something that's interesting to me is that, I think about Edwards-Helaire in Kansas City, different scenario there. But I look at JK and he looks small to me. He weighs more than Edwards-Helaire. They run him between the tackles plenty. Now they're probably not loading the box like they do against Baltimore, but still, I think giving him opportunities is important. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is the Deshon Elliott. Sorry, not the AFC North. Deshon Elliott, definitely a question mark entering the season after taking over for free safety and now free agent. Earl Thomas. What have you learned about Elliott so far, and how do you feel about him moving forward?
Well, I mean, he's been everything that we kind of expected him to be, and I know he had a question mark on his head, filling that role. But you see the guy in training camp, you see him in a little bit of time that we've actually seen him in games. He's a heat-seeking missile. He hits the ball carrier. He makes big plays. He doesn't shy down from contact. And that is kind of the polar opposite of Earl Thomas last year, as Ravens fans will all too familiar remember. I think that's really the biggest difference. I mean, I don't think he's as good in coverage, but at the same time, I think you can mask that through the bazillion cornerbacks Baltimore has. They've now kind of cycling in safeties. You're seeing that happen a little bit more often as they kind of try to figure out their schemes and what player fits best. So I think they're masking his issues better than they ever did with Earl Thomas. The big question ultimately was his health. And, so far he's been healthy, knock on wood. I don't think he's been on the injury report as of yet, at least not off the top of my head. So, that's 6 games. Where I think he had 6 games last year before he was on injured reserve. And the year before that, he made it through 0 games before being on injured reserve. So at least we're trending in the right direction, which for this team, they have a tendency, Rashad Perryman, to shove guys out in the field that can't stay healthy and then continue to do it regardless of them never being able to stay healthy. So at least we're seeing a guy improve on that front, which, as Bill Belichick said earlier today in terms of Carl Davis, he's available. And that's kind of the biggest thing you can have in a team now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely important to have him around, because I don't know if he were to get hurt, I don't know what they would do at the free safety position. So let's hope he stays healthy. When you talk about the AFC North, last year to this year is night and day. I mean, it's so much more competitive this season. And with the Ravens being at 4-1, kind of surprising to see them not in first place, see them looking up at the Steelers in the division standings. Do you think, now I know Cleveland took a hard loss this past week, but up to that point, they'd won 4 in a row since the loss to Baltimore. Do you think there's a possibility we could see 3 teams coming out of the North to make the playoffs?
Certainly. I mean, the playoffs have been extended this year. We're now, I believe, at 7 teams. And based on what last year's records were going to be, there were going to be 2 teams in the AFC North to make the playoffs. Pittsburgh was going to go ahead and squeak in. So certainly with the way that Cleveland's playing right now, at least 4-2, barring them having a complete collapse, which very well could happen, and that is totally a Cleveland thing to have happen. They should at least be in the running for it. I mean, I think at this point they're like 4th or 5th in the AFC, so they're right in the middle of the playoff hunt as of right now. So again, barring a collapse or barring some other team winning all their games all of a sudden, Cleveland at the very least should be fighting for a playoff spot in week 16, 17.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting one, certainly. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention, and I keep coming back to this because I think you have a great point there, where there is a reluctancy to make a change, historically speaking, when, we see the results and then, we keep doing the same thing. With that being said, the trade deadline is around the corner. We saw Eric DeCosta make moves last year. He seems to be much more aggressive than an Ozzie Newsome. Do you expect the Ravens to make a trade before the deadline passes? And if so, what type of player are the Ravens targeting? A lot of people are talking about wide receiver. A lot of people are talking about pass rusher. But is it either of those? Is there even a market for O-line? What do you think is going to happen at that trade deadline?
Well, that's tough. And I think you're right. I think Eric DeCosta, at the very least, is going to be calling up people. You've got a few teams that are either clearly tanking and trading players, aka the Jets, or you've got other teams that have already fired their coach and maybe looking to go ahead and rebuild. And hey, draft picks now, or you get a team that's desperate, you can go ahead and potentially get some good draft picks this year for players that ultimately you're not going to go to the playoffs. So what does it matter to you? The big interesting thing there is ultimately where does Baltimore go with that stuff? Pass rushers, are not a dime a dozen. They tend to make great money. They tend to cost a lot if you trade for them. Baltimore probably not going to go ahead and give 2 first-round picks for a guy. Not going to happen. Probably not going to happen. Watch it now happen. Everything I say happens. It goes the polar opposite. So I wouldn't expect a pass rusher to come over here to Baltimore. And I also wouldn't expect an offensive lineman because, again, if you're a team that has a wealth of offensive linemen, you're going to a team like Philadelphia and going, you're going to give me whatever I want for this guy, aren't you? Like, you desperately need him. Baltimore isn't quite as desperate. And just like pass rushers, offensive linemen, there's not a huge market for them. The really good ones that are worth trading for tend to be worth a lot. And Baltimore, again, tends to be very, very cheap, regardless if it's Ozzie Newsome or Eric DeCosta when it comes to trading draft picks. So, I'd look at tight ends and wide receivers. I think that's the thing that could get on the field immediately in this offense. Baltimore really does still need a third tight end, especially a pass-catching tight end if they can have Boyle maybe do more blocking, which will shore up both the offensive line and give Jackson another target. And in addition to that, I think you can try to find someone if you're not comfortable giving Duvernay more playing time. Guys like Brandon Cooks could be available potentially. I look at Houston and go, really, any of their top wide receivers could be really nice over here, and I bet they would be fairly cheap, which fits in exactly what Baltimore is looking for. But whoever they end up trading for, my guess is it's going to be a third or a fourth year player. You're effectively renting them for a year or two when you can go ahead and push their salary cap hit in a future deal for another year or two down the line when you have the cap space to do it. If you're Baltimore, you do not have the cap space to do it now. So you're not going to go after a guy like Julio Jones who's making bank unless you're going to give him an extension. And, he's making $1 million this year and $20 million next year, which, again, not really Baltimore style.
Yeah, well, I guess we got to ask about one guy. There's one guy that would come a heck of a lot cheaper than the rest and would cost 0 draft picks in order to acquire. Just got to wait until after week 8 to use him. And that would be, of course, Antonio Brown, who is being linked as of today with the Seattle Seahawks. But they also have in that article that the Seahawks are not alone in their pursuit of Antonio Brown. So do you think that the Ravens are that other team or one of the other teams that he's referring to? And how would you feel about bringing in AB?
No and no. Look, they got rid of Earl Thomas because he was a locker room distraction. He wasn't a team player. And any discussion of bringing in Antonio Brown, who threatened to punch his general manager in the face, seems like an unwise decision for a team that has that. That's before you get into all of the allegations against Antonio Brown, including the ones that he's admitted fault for. This is a team that doesn't like wife beaters. And you've got a guy who, supposedly did significantly worse. You've got a guy who is on film, cussing out his baby mama in front of his kids, in front of cops. Those things are not exactly Baltimore standards. And I'd have to imagine they would have made some statement. They would have done something this offseason when it came to Antonio Brown and potentially doing that. Baltimore did everything they possibly could to not talk about him, even when asked. Now, could be that just, when asked about it, Eric DeCosta just forgot that he was asked about it and answered a different question. I've never seen that happen. So I think your answer is Baltimore is just trying to not say anything about him because they don't want to bring him in and they don't want to upset anyone. So you just kind of let it happen. And that's saying that Antonio Brown isn't suspended further after that. He's still in the middle of some legal battles. He's now fired, I think, his last lawyer too. So he's not out of the woods in terms of being suspended yet either. Let's be real about that. And again, Earl Thomas, man, if you got rid of Earl Thomas, who was far less of a distraction than Antonio Brown is when he's not even on the team, I don't know why you would bring in Antonio Brown.
Well, then,
it's going to be interesting.
Do you think that the Ravens front office or coaches are all upset with, I saw Marlon Humphrey retweeted it and said, I see there's an extra team. Like that's all he needed to hear. Do you think that they're like, man, Do you think they'd wish that their players would stop commenting on it?
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably a PR person that said, "Look, guys, can you stop?" Well, or at the very least, like they want to know what's happening. I mean, I know we've been asked about certain things as reporters. What are guys saying? Did they say anything that we need to be alarmed about? So yeah, I mean, my guess is probably secretly they're like, oh God, I wish just everyone would shut up about it. But at the same time, Baltimore's also very much had this approach, at least the players have, of the front office controls the front office. What we have, we would love to bring all these guys in. We're not in control of that, and we know it, and we know where our place is. The front office knows where their place is, and they don't tend to join up in that regard. So, yeah, they probably don't want to speaking about it, but my guess is no one's that concerned.
Man, it's going to be interesting. For some reason, I just have this gut feeling that there's more interest. And I understand all your points 100%. I don't know why. I just keep getting this feeling that there's some sort of interest here. I don't know. But I just want to throw a couple names at you, and we'll do a little bit of rapid fire here. I want you to give us your likelihood, 1 through 10. Or between 1 being not confident at all that would happen, 10 being extremely confident that it would happen. Glenn and I identified 2 people that are both in the last year of their contract, unless we're mistaken. But Melvin Ingram from the Chargers and Mike Williams, both from the Chargers, are 2 names that I think could be potential trade fits based on the fact that where they are in their contract and where their record is as a team. Where are you at with those guys? Melvin Ingram first, and then Mike Williams.
Well, look at Melvin Ingram. I just pulled up his contract right now. He has a base salary of $14 million. Let's just say you get him at the midseason point, so you cut that in half. The Chargers go ahead and eat all of his bonuses. So you're looking at $7 million. I don't think Baltimore actually has the cap space to make that work, unless they could do some finagling with some other deals, and potentially that would happen. But that's a 31-year-old pass rusher. And you look at his stats. 2022 games played according to Over the Cap right now.
Yeah.
So why would you trade for him necessarily if he's not available? And then you look at last year, sacks, 7 sacks. That's not awful. 11 tackles for loss, 12 quarterback hits. Not terrible. But I don't think you're interested in paying him, $7, $8, $9, $10 million this year. For a half year effectively when he's 31. He's a free agent after that. I mean, maybe if you got him for a 6th or 7th round pick. So to answer your question with a number, I'd say that's probably a 4 for me.
All right.
And who was the second player?
Mike Williams, the same team, the wide receiver. Also, if I'm not mistaken, the last year of his deal.
Yes.
Yeah, certainly might be able to use another possession receiver, a big body guy that can go up and get the ball. Might be used in pretty well in Baltimore. We'll see.
Yeah, I remember looking at him a little while ago, actually, like a few years ago, as an option, a guy that I actually really liked as a potential trade. 26-year-old. I mean, again, he's heavy cap hit next year, which actually works out in Baltimore's favor. This year, he's certainly very affordable, $6.3 million cap hit. Again, you're not talking about prorated bonus or roster bonus, so they're going to eat that. So yeah, you're looking at like paying him $400,000. That makes a ton of sense if you're Baltimore. And as you mentioned, big guy, 6'4", 218 pounds. He's certainly getting the job done, or has gotten the job done. A 1st round pick, 7th overall in 2017. So you're getting a young player. You're getting a guy with another year left on his contract. You could potentially extend him for $16-17 million a year if you feel happy about him there, and you'll get him for the rest of this year. So, worst case scenario, you spend a 3rd or a 4th round pick on him. He doesn't pan out. It was a half-year rental, and you let him go and recoup whatever you can in terms of compensatory picks.
Yeah, because I tell you what, and that I'll rightfully give the credit to Glenn. That was a great identification there, because I tell you what, at the detriment of his own body, Mike Williams goes up and gets it. I haven't. Oh my gosh, the catch he made in that Saints game,
incredible,
was just incredible.
And he had their number 1 corner manned up on him, and multiple others trying to come over and help knock it away, and he just went up and grabbed it. And that's what I want to see. I talked about Boykin playing smaller than his actual size. And this is what I've been wanting to see out of Boykin all this time. A guy that can go up and high point a ball. He waits for the ball to come down to his level and often waits for it to come hit him in the stomach before he tries to make the catch. And I don't think that gets it done at this level and doesn't take advantage of his size, which he always have advantage over the DB.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you. I think Boykin doesn't play with the confidence that he should have. And Mike Williams, yeah, as I now look at his picture on Pro Football Reference, I took a look at him a few years ago as a potential trade option for that exact reason. He's a guy that tacks the football. He's big, he's physical, he's fast.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have a 40 from the combine, but he is fast. He can get it done. So certainly, again, that's a guy that if the Chargers are willing to give him up, and that's the key. What's the cost? What's the cost for a first round pick?
Right. Because he's not even their number one guy. That's the crazy
thing. They just extended
Keenan
Allen. They gave him a bunch of money.
Right.
So, yeah, do you want to pay 2 wide receivers? I don't know if you want to if you're the Chargers.
Certainly. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge question. I think if he's available, a lot of it's going to depend on what the trade cost is. If it's a second round pick, maybe not. I would probably give that more of a 4. If he's a third pick or later, or a combination of late picks that begins with a third is the highest, I'd bump that up to a good 6-7.
Nice.
I think if he's available, I think you pull the trigger on that. If he's a third and a fifth, absolutely. That's an 8-9 all day long. Go for it.
Oh, that'd be awesome. So we'll let you go with this here, Matt. Based on what I read, this is the question I came out with from the article. What is it that the Ravens can do to change your opinion? And based on what you've seen so far, how can they change it?
Well, so it's a few things. And I want to specify ahead of time that, I don't think they're playing very well right now. That does not mean they can't play well. It doesn't mean they don't have the talent to play well. It doesn't mean they don't have the coaching staff to play well. They've got all of those things. They're just not doing it. So really, when you look at this team, it's the issue they've had a lot of the times under Harbaugh, which is stop beating yourself. Do the thing you do well. You run the football well. You're a power run team. RPOs, get Jackson out in space one-on-one. Have him go ahead and connect intermediate and short throws in the middle of the field. That's what he's good at. Stop trying to go ahead and hit the 80-yard bombs. Stop trying to go ahead and put 17 running backs on the field. Mm-hmm. Stop trying to do the things you're not good at doing. Once that happens, this is a really good team. We've seen it. 10 of 11 starters from last year returned this year. They've got it. They just need to do it. And that's the problem. And honestly, a lot of it, as much as Ravens fans don't want to hear it, Lamar Jackson, he needs to play better football. He needs to be more refined in his mechanics. He needs to play smarter football, not take a sack on third down and push yourself out of field goal range. He needs to stop trying to force the deep ball to Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews. He needs to diversify a little bit on who he's looking at. Even if it's a dump off to a running back, force the defense to counter everything you've got going on. That's how they play their best football. Unfortunately, he's trying to be like Aaron Rodgers. He's trying to go ahead and throw for 300 yards and complete every pitch. Just stop it and play good football, and you guys will be fine. That's it. Hopefully they get to that point. Hopefully maybe they make a trade. They get a guy like Mike Williams in there that will help out a lot. And I think they can do it. As of right now, though, we have not seen that out of them through 6 games. And the last 4 have been especially terrible on exactly that front of just not playing Baltimore football.
Oh man, I hope they can get back to playing that Baltimore football that we love to watch and get back to some more easy going games. I mean, that last week was a little too stressful with the Eagles come screaming back and almost taking or tying the game up there right before the end of regulation. But thanks for coming on with us, Matt. Why don't you let the fans know where they can find you and what you're working on?
Absolutely. Well, you can always catch me at ravenswire.usatoday.com. As well as the Ravens Wire on Twitter. You can catch me very specifically on Twitter at @MatthewS_NFL. And as always, I'm looking at the Baltimore Ravens. I'm seeing how they can improve. I'm seeing how maybe they stink a little bit in some areas, and I'm rooting for them to go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, we know you're gonna be rooting for him. We appreciate it. And
that's right.
And also, if you don't catch him all those places, just keep watching here because he'll be back. I have no doubt about that.
Absolutely.
Cool. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on
Absolutely,
again, Matt, and
Have a good
night.
one, Matt.
All right.